Hi, everyone. My name is Jane Ruby, and I am president of the League of Women Voters of Chicago. Thank you so much for joining us in our early new year to learn more about ranked choice voting and Chicago. Just a few words before we get started about League of Women Voters, and then I'll introduce our presenter. So the League of Women Voters of Chicago is a nonpartisan grassroots organization working to protect and expand voting rights and ensure everyone is represented in our democracy. We empower voters and defend democracy through advocacy and education. The League of Women Voters of Chicago encourages informed and active participation in government while influencing public policy. We never endorse or oppose political parties or candidates, but we are political. And we do this through our two roles, voter service and citizen education, where we present unbiased, nonpartisan information about elections, the voting process, and issues, and also through action and advocacy. So we are nonpartisan, but after study, we use our positions to advocate for or against particular policies in the public interest. And one of the sort of passionate topics and passionate expanding our democracy initiatives that we've really been excited about the past few years has been ranked choice voting. And we are so thrilled to be able to be coalition partners with FairVote Illinois on bringing ranked choice voting here to Chicago. So I will introduce Rebecca Williams of FairVote Illinois. Rebecca, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and FairVote before we get started and then start screen sharing?
Hey, yes. I'm Rebecca. I live in Willowbrook, but I lived in Chicago for 6.5 years before moving out here. And I started with FairVote Illinois back in 2022. I started as the statewide organizer, recently took on the position of executive director. And FairVote Illinois itself has been in existence since 2017. That's when it started building. That's when it was just a small group of volunteers that were passionate about ranked choice voting. By 2020, it was large enough where they were able to officially incorporate, and and here we are. So you'll learn a bit more about our wins and everything toward the end of the presentation, but that's a little bit about our history, and we advocate for ranked choice voting at pretty much every level of government. So we've been really focused at the municipal level, but we'd ultimately love to see it for our statewide and federal elections too. Jane, did you want me to just jump into the presentation?
Yep.
Great. For everyone here, I know probably a lot of you are already familiar with ranked choice voting. So kind of bear with me if a lot of this information is stuff that you already know, but hopefully you'll learn some new stuff. And hopefully, for those of you who aren't as familiar with this will be really educational. There should be lots of time at the end for questions. So if you don't want to forget it, feel free to drop it in the chat and we'll address it, or you can just ask them at the end. So we at FairVote Illinois, and we think the League of Women Voters agrees too, that voting needs an upgrade. So the sad truth of America today is a lot of people feel like our politics are really broken. We think that our politicians are not respondent to voter needs, that they aren't actually working in our interests. The vast majority of people in some polls say that they think government is broken. So if you're feeling like that, it's not just you. And we see in some polls as well that public trust has been near historic lows for a while now. And one of the things that's important to understand about the way we vote is it drives a lot of this unresponsiveness to voters. It drives down our choice, and it makes it so voters feel like often their vote doesn't really matter. They don't have much of a voice. Often the outcome is predetermined. And so I need to talk about what that type of voting is. And as I'm going through this presentation, ranked choice voting it can work really well for all levels of government. So I'll be talking about examples of where this can help at the federal level, at state, and certainly in Chicago. But plurality voting means that to win, you don't actually need a majority of the votes. You just need to get the most votes. So, of course, if there are only two candidates running, someone will get a majority. But once you get three or more people running, you can win with a plurality. So, when this happens, what it does is it makes it so as a voter, we have to make certain considerations. We might think, okay, I really like so and so candidate, but do they even have a chance of winning? Am I going to be wasting my vote if I vote for a certain candidate? Everyone wants their vote to actually matter and have some impact in the election. And then as a candidate, there are considerations that they make as well. Again, if they're running in a field of three or more people, they might just think to themselves, okay, I don't need to win over a majority of the voters. What's the least number of voters I need to win? That's not great for our communities. And the other thing they might be thinking before they even get into the race is, will I just be a spoiler? Again, this system, it has the tendency to drive down choice because a candidate might think, I'm really similar to so and so. I don't know if I could beat them. I might just split the vote. So there are a lot of negative externalities that come out of this current system that we use. And we can see that a really obvious example of that is at the presidential level. So every 4 years, we get the same thing with the presidential election. If someone is more on the conservative side, they might say to a friend, you know what, I think I'm going to vote for the libertarian this year. I really don't like the Republican candidate. Their friend's going to say, what? Are you crazy? You're going to make it so the Democrat can win. If you've got a friend and they're like, I really align with the Green Party platform so much more. I don't think I'm going to go Democrat this time. They're going to go, what are you talking about? You're just helping the Republican win. So even when it feels like there are technically more choices on our ballot, most voters really realize a lot of times it's only two viable choices, and then we're stuck voting for the lesser of two evils. And what we really see a lot of the time is that candidates don't need to be responsive to voters, just power brokers. Again, this can happen anywhere from the local up to the federal level. And it's what is so frustrating to us, especially when we're trying to encourage more people to vote, but time and time again, people feel like nothing is changing. Another example of where we see this plurality voting or plurality voting wins a lot is in primary races. So I'm sure all of you know that in Illinois, most of our districts are not competitive. They're either solidly red or solidly blue. So if there is going to be some sort of competitive race, it's going to happen in the primary. So sometimes you get pretty contested primaries with 4 or 5 candidates, such as this one back in 2010. This was a solidly blue district. There were 5 candidates running. Robin Gable won that district with barely over 27% of the vote, and she went on to win in the general because it's a blue district, and she still has the seat to this day. Now, this is not to say anything negative about the candidates, but we really have no idea if she was the most favored candidate because about 73% of other people in the primary voted for someone else. This is also where we can see really extreme candidates coming out of general elections because in primaries, so many fewer people go out to vote. So what you can get is a minority of voters like this, just 27% or something, sending a candidate to the general that is not reflective of the views of the community. Not to say that happened with Robin here, but that kind of explains why we're starting to see candidates more on the extremes of both sides of the political spectrum because you get these kind of results in primaries and then you don't have competitive districts. Same thing can, of course, happen on the Republican side. So this was an example from 2020. Again, 5 candidates, and it's great to have more choice. But when you have a plurality system, you get wins like this, where he had just over a third of the vote, 67% people in the district voted for someone else. And then, of course, we have the Chicago elections. So some of you might be thinking, okay, well, in Chicago, we do require a majority, but they require a majority that makes it so voters have to come out to vote again. You have to pay for and run an entire other election. Voter turnout is different in both elections, and it's just a really unfair and unnecessary system. So, ranked choice voting, what I'm talking about today, it's often called instant runoff voting because it works basically the way a runoff would work, only you can go to multiple rounds. You can go past 2 rounds, and I'll kind of demonstrate what that could look like. But we have 2 examples of the most recent mayoral races here. So back in
So back in
2019,
2019.
you had 14 candidates running. And so you just take the top 2 candidates, no matter how low of a vote percentage they got. So that was Tony Preckwinkle, Lori Lightfoot. Between the 2 of them, they didn't even get 35% of the vote. And then in 2023, there were 9 mayoral candidates. Again, both of them advanced to the runoff with pretty low percentages just because the vote was, so split between all the candidates. And again, what this is doing is it's making it so voters often have to think strategically. They have to think, okay, maybe I like so and so, but I see that they're polling pretty low. I don't want to waste my vote on them. And we actually heard this a lot in this most recent election. Of course, we were paying close attention to that. And there were several candidates' names that came up where people said they really loved their ideas. They like what they said in their rallies or when they came to their door or whatever, but they weren't voting for them because they felt that they didn't have a chance to win. And that is yet another thing that makes it so often in our system, we just don't have very much choice because candidates just choose not to even run. So the system that we have in Chicago, it's an attempt at figuring out what's the true majority preference, but it's pretty, it still doesn't often produce great results, and there's just a much better way. What we're currently doing, we do not think is a good form of democracy. We must do better if we want to get better results, and we're going to do that with ranked choice voting. So, quick history on ranked choice voting in the United States. Some people think, wait, is this idea even tested? Has anyone used this? Is this a brand new thing? It's actually been used for over a century in Ireland and Australia. So, it's a pretty old idea. It's tried and tested. It works great in those countries, but it is relatively newer to the United States. So, back in 2000, there were only 2 municipalities that were using it. But in the aughts, there started to really be this grassroots effort across some states. And by 2012, you saw a lot more municipal adoption. So a lot of cities in the Bay Area in California started to adopt it, some places up in Minnesota, and some more places along the Northeast. So again, more municipal adoption. And then fast forward a little over a decade later, there's this large expansion of ranked choice voting because and this has pretty much all been grassroots efforts. So Alaska and Maine have actually adopted it statewide. They've used it for both of those states have used it for a couple election cycles now. So they use it for all their statewide and federal elections. And then there are over 50 municipalities that are currently using it for local elections or are set to use it in the near future. So I'm going to go through kind of just the tabulation of ranked choice voting, how it works, and then we'll get into the benefits of it. So with ranked choice voting, basically when you mark your ballot, you put your first choice, but then if you want, you can also put second, third, fourth. You can mark as many as you want. And if your first choice is not viable, it's then going to consider your other choices. So this is an example of how a voter might fill out their ballot. We've got some characters here running for mayor of Toontown. And this voter said they want Sylvester first, then Bugs Bunny second, Wile E. Coyote third, and then Daffy Duck fourth. And we just haven't done Roadrunner at all. Maybe he seemed like a jerk. You don't have to rank everyone with ranked choice voting, so that's fine. So here's how this plays out. So the first thing you do is you count up the votes. You see, does someone have a majority? Did they get to that threshold of 50% plus one? If someone does, it's a normal election, they win. But in this case, we see kind of a common split where you've got a couple front runners, several people getting smaller percentages of the vote. No one's gotten the majority. So we need to go to an instant runoff round. We're going to eliminate the character in last place. So that is Wiley. And we're going to say, okay, what was the second choice of those voters? And it's kind of redistributed accordingly. So then we look again, does someone have a majority yet? Nope. We have to repeat the process. We do the instant runoff round by round until someone gets a majority. So now you see Sylvester is only at 12%. He's going to get the axe next. But the voters will still be able to have their vote go to their second or maybe their third choice. If Wiley was their second choice, it would go to their third in this case. So we see, does someone have a majority now? Not yet. So, but they're kind of neck and neck with 43 and 42%. Now we got to eliminate Roadrunner. And we see that Bugs Bunny has actually won with 54% of the vote. Now, Daffy Duck was initially in the lead with the very first round of counting. I will say that most of the time, the candidate that receives the initial plurality of votes, they are usually the winner, but not always. Sometimes it's just the case that there were a lot of other candidates that were more aligned. And so once you eliminate some of them, their votes will, in this case, their votes went to Bugs Bunny and he won. So what we get with ranked choice voting or instant runoff voting is that the winners have majority support, but we don't need a runoff to get there. Multiple challengers are welcome. It's great to have more choice. And even if people have pretty similar ideas, maybe they bring different qualifications, it's still great if multiple people are running. And voters are really freed up to vote for the candidate they want, not against the candidate they hate, which is often how we are making our calculations when voting nowadays. So an important question, of course, to ask is, does this work in practice? So I'm kind of going to go through a lot of the benefits and some of the data that we have to back that up. One of the great things we see with ranked choice voting, especially at the local level, is that campaigns tend to be more civil. And the reason for this is because it's no longer just a zero-sum game. If you are being really nasty and attacking a lot of the other candidates in your race, people might be turned off by that and not rank you at all. Whereas right now it's just about if you can convince the voters that that candidate is bad, then hopefully they'll vote for you. What we saw in the first New York City election, where they used ranked choice voting, is 59% of voters found the tone to be roughly the same in terms of whether it was negative or positive. But of those who noticed a change, they were 4 times more likely to say, yeah, it was actually a lot more positive this time. We even sometimes have seen things like co-campaigning. So this was a screenshot from a primary that happened in Maine many years ago, where 2 similar candidates were kind of campaigning together sometimes because they were essentially saying, hey, we want pretty similar things for Maine, so rank us together. Another really important question to ask, and something that is often flung about as a criticism of ranked choice voting, is, well, are voters going to understand it? Some people say it's too complicated, but if they're saying this, they haven't looked at the data. Fortunately, all the data we have of the places where it's implemented, even on first time used, which is what all of this is from, shows that voters think ranked choice voting is easy, It's simple to complete the ballot, and the majority of them definitely tend to take advantage of being able to rank multiple. Again, you can always just do one, but if you like multiple, then you should rank them. So in New York City, 95% found it easy, 86% in San Francisco, 90% Minneapolis, and that just goes up in subsequent elections, of course, as people get more and more used to it. And another really great thing that we see with ranked choice voting is that it tends to help women and candidates of color. We think that the reason for this is probably a couple different things. Again, voters are free to vote their true preference. So it could be that you have some new candidates coming in where maybe before they would have thought, I don't know if they have a chance of winning. Well, now with ranked choice voting, they actually vote for them and then they win more often. Could also be that more people are just choosing to run under this system. But what we see is definitely a significant increase. This data that's pulled here was across 519 elections, and we saw it was just over 40% of candidates of color were winning before. It was up to almost 60% after ranked choice voting was implemented. And women of color, it went up almost 10 percentage points after ranked choice voting. And just another example of that is in New York City, again in their 2021 elections. Prior to RCV, women had never held more than 18 seats on the council. After RCV, women actually held a majority for the first time. They got 31 seats. And then another important question to ask, I think, because we want people to want to vote is, do people actually like the system? Are they happy with it? And this question hasn't been asked as much in exit polling, but where we do have some data on it, we definitely see that that is the case. The voters are liking it. 79% said they want to keep using it moving forward. Over 60% were saying, why can't we use this in all of our elections? And similar thing in Maine, that they wanted to keep or even expand it. So with ranked choice voting, again, you're getting true majority winner. It encourages more choices. You often get more positive campaigning where candidates are focused on the issues. Voters don't worry about wasting their votes, and therefore we're able to vote our true preferences. And since we're talking about Chicago today in particular, I would be remiss if I did not talk about the huge cost saving opportunity with this city. So again, most places in Illinois don't do runoffs, so this isn't so much a thing, but it is in Chicago. And I've broken it down with the exact numbers for the last three runoffs. In 2015, it was about 12 and a quarter million that it cost just for the runoff. By 2019, we were almost up to 17 million and just under 20 million in 2023. So we know that the city pretty much always has budget issues. And at this point, we're spending about 5 million a year over the course of, 4 years just to run a runoff, which, isn't something that voters are asking for. No one wants to have to come out twice to vote. So it would be really great if we could save that money and use it for something else as well. So at FairVote Illinois, like I said, we are wanting to get ranked choice voting across all of Illinois, but I want to talk today about specifically what we're doing for Chicago and how you all can help us with that. And just to touch on our wins so far, because we have had several wins in the few years that we've been at this. We had two advisory statewide referendums, which is basically just where we were asking voters in places where they weren't necessarily good targets for municipal adoption. Hey, would you like it if you got to use ranked choice voting for elections across the state? And we asked that in both Berwyn and Peoria. And Peoria, 67% voted yes, 82 in Berwyn. So it was a really popular idea in both of those places. And then in Evanston and Oak Park, we actually ran binding referendum campaigns, which is what we would be looking to do in Chicago as well. And Evanston adopted ranked choice voting back in 2022. 82% voted yes for it. And Oak Park very recently said yes to it in the general election in November. So 79% voted yes for that. We anticipate that both of these cities will start using it in 2027. Quick note on Evanston, some of you may have heard. So we were supposed to start using ranked choice voting in Evanston this April. 2025, that was going to be the first election. Unfortunately, the Cook County clerk is not wanting to implement it. We haven't really gotten any answer as to why, but we are still involved in litigation to try to make that happen. That decision from the judge so far, it only affects Evanston. And the nice thing about our Chicago work is Chicago has its own election jurisdiction. Its elections are ran by the uh Chicago Board of Elections, yes. And so you will not be held the city will not be held hostage by the whims of the clerk should the city ultimately vote yes on this. So we're in a better position with Chicago. But so now I want to just briefly speak to the plan for Chicago before I open up time for questions and speak to our upcoming lobby day. But basically, it in other cities that we've worked in, we've done this a couple of ways where either the city council puts it on the ballot or we do a petition drive. In Chicago, we really need the city council to put it on the ballot. We're not even, considering a petition drive. So we need a simple majority vote. We would need 26 members to vote to place a binding RCV referendum on the ballot. Right now, Matt Martin is our champion, and we also have several other members of the council who we know are really supportive and excited about the idea of getting ranked choice voting for Chicago. But Matt Martin, man, he goes back to, 2020 of being really supportive of this idea. And we're working with the city council right now that we know is pretty favorable based on how they've responded to surveys, recent things they've said publicly, and everything. So we think that this is a good time to push. So our goal is to get them to place a referendum on the March 2026 primary election ballot. And if that passes, the Chicago Board of Elections would have time to implement it for your next municipal election in 2027. So that's kind of the goal right now. Oh, I have this fun meme in here. No matter, nice thing about ranked choice voting is no matter where you are on the political spectrum, you can agree we need better elections.
All right. Well, on that note, thank you so much, Rebecca and Abigail with FairVote Illinois. We really appreciate you coming and speaking to us. Sorry. League of Women Voters, usually monthly, but it kind of ebbs and flows, hosts this Chicago in Focus series, sometimes over Zoom, sometimes in person. This will be the first one of the series for this year. So thank you to both of you for jumping on right after the new year to kind of get us all hyped and excited about ranked choice voting here. We really appreciate it. The recording will be available, so feel free to share that with your networks. And we'll make sure that everyone also has the link to sign up and learn more about our efforts around ranked choice voting here in Chicago. I will also say that I put in the chat a link to our calendar for some other things that are going on with the league, both for members but also for the general public. And our next Chicago in Focus will be February 3rd, and I'll also put information about that. But we will hear from Dr. Larry McClellan on the Freedom Seekers and the Underground Railroad in Northern Illinois, and that will be in person at the University of Chicago's Regenstein Library. So if you can make that on February 3rd, we'd love to see you there. And I would be remiss if I did not also do a plug that we only have a couple more weeks left in this current presidential administration. And one of the league's big initiatives for 100 years or more has been publishing of the ERA. It has met all ratification and congressional requirements. The only thing we need right now is the president to direct the archivist to publish it. If we are the only democracy that does not have equal rights in our constitution, and that needs to change. The states have done their job, Congress has done their job decades ago. It is now up to the president. If we can get the equal rights published, that will protect everybody. Everybody benefits from an ERA in their constitution. So if you have a few minutes, please call the White House, text the White House, do whatever you can, shout it from the rooftops, tell everybody you know to contact the White House about publishing the ERA. And on that note, I will stop the recording and we can stay on for a few extra minutes if there's any additional follow-up. But thank you to everyone who joined us this evening, and we hope you have a great rest of your new year.